Thank you so much for joining. Today, I would like to give you an introduction to a topic very close to my heart as a former M&A practitioner. I would like to give you an idea of what share deal and an asset deal is. These are two methods used in M&A to actually acquire a company or assets of a company. And the main differences are how the company or parts of the company is being acquired. In a share deal, the acquirer purchases shares of the target company directly from its shareholders. So how does it look like? You have shareholders here, shareholders. Those shareholders own the target company. So they own shares in this company. And if you are the acquirer, let's say another business, for example, then what you do is you buy those shares. So these are the shares that you buy, and in exchange, you basically give those shareholders money. And then what will happen is the target company moves to you. So you cut it here, and the entire target company moves to the new acquirer. And then you can pay in cash. There are other considerations, a share swap, whatever. But it's very important that you buy shares in the company, so you own the entire company, and your deal is basically with the shareholders. This means that the buyer, here in this case, acquires ownership of the entire company, including all its assets, liabilities, contracts, and obligations. And essentially, the company here, target company, continues to operate under new ownership without any changes in its legal entity. In an asset deal, it's a bit different. The acquirer selects and purchases specific assets and may assume certain liabilities. What does this mean? Same scenario. If we assume we have shareholders here, then target company here. Again, they hold shares. You are the acquirer or the purchaser. What happens now? You're not buying shares. You are basically buying selected assets from this company. And those assets move to you. Basically, if this is a legal entity here, then you buy those assets. And what you do is you basically pay the owner of the asset, which is the company, the money. So you don't have a deal with the shareholders, you basically have a deal with the target company. And then depending on what you plan to do with those assets, you can integrate them into your existing business, or you set up a new legal entity or whatever. But the main part is that you pick certain assets and that you basically change the components of the legal entity. We call this sometimes here cherry picking, because the buyer can basically purchase desirable assets such as equipment, inventory, intellectual property, and so on, while leaving unwanted assets or liabilities. The legal entity here of the target company remains with the seller. So this remains, nothing has changed. The shareholders still own the target company, just certain assets have been extracted. There are key differences in terms of liability, complexity, tax, business continuity, risk control, legal and regulatory considerations. In summary, there's no best way. It really depends whether you look from a seller perspective, from a buyer perspective. It depends on whether you talk about many assets or whether you talk about a small company. So if we go quickly through liabilities, so in a share deal, the buyer acquires the entire target company as a whole, including liabilities, whether disclosed or undisclosed, known or unknown, legal liabilities. It would also include pending lawsuits, environmental obligation, and so on. So if the target company has unresolved lawsuits or unpaid taxes, the buyer inherits those risks after the completion. Therefore, whenever we talk about share deals, there will be a thorough due diligence. It's a process where you basically check whether there are any hidden liabilities or any assets you don't want. Buyers also often include so-called indemnity clauses in the purchase agreement to protect themselves from unexpected liabilities. So there's a lot of legal discussion involved to ensure nothing has been transferred or paid that is negative to the acquirer. In an asset deal, it's a bit easier from a liability perspective because you pick those assets before that you want to acquire. It's more flexible. If you just want to choose certain equipment, real estate, intellectual property, but you want to exclude obligations like outstanding loans or environmental cleanup costs, you can do so. There are some key differences in some jurisdictions where when you obtain an asset, you also need to obtain certain liabilities under so-called successor liability law. But this is a more specific example. Complexity. Share deals are quite easy because you just buy the entire company and then the company continues to operate. However, because also all the liabilities transfer to the buyer, the due diligence process of those share deals is more exhaustive to uncover those risks, which can make the preparation of such a process quite lengthy. In an asset deal, they're more complex in terms of administration and legal documentation because you need to actually transfer every single asset. And every single asset or asset class may require a separate agreement and sometimes consents from third parties, such as landlord, licensors, or customers. So if, for example, if you want to take over a lease agreement, the landlord may need to approve the transfer. And the process of carving out specific assets can be time-consuming, especially if the target company operates in multiple countries. Share deal, when we talk about tax implications, from a seller's perspective, a share deal often results in more favorable tax treatments. In an asset deal, the buyer can step up the tax basis because you have spent so much on those assets. This will result potentially in higher depreciation and amortization deductions and lower your taxable income in the future. So there is a significant advantage for the buyer in an asset deal. However, the seller may face higher tax liabilities in an asset deals because the proceeds are often taxed as ordinary income. There are some nuances in terms of indirect taxes, VAT, some additional stamped duties are applicable to certain assets, but don't want to go into detail here. Continuity share deal, smooth as discussed before because everything just moves. Employees generally remain employed under the same entity without requiring new employment contracts. Asset deal is quite complicated. Employee relationships may also need to be transferred to the buyer, potentially requiring new employment agreements or consultation with employee representatives as dictated by local labor laws. Risk control. Risk is a bit higher in a share deal because you sometimes you don't know what you get because you basically assume everything, all the liabilities and potentially operational issues. Legal and regulatory considerations. Usually a share deal requires shareholder approval from the seller and may be subject to certain security laws. And also regulatory filings may be necessary if the transaction exceeds certain thresholds or involve sensitive industries. Antitrust law is quite important in those share deals. In an asset deal, usually shareholder approval is not required, only if the assets being sold represent a substantial portion of the seller's business. However, some assets may trigger regulatory approval, especially for industries like in healthcare, banking, and so on. But, as discussed earlier, each asset class may have unique legal requirements for transfers, such as title deeds for real estate or patents for intellectual property. Yeah, so in summary, the choice of share deal, asset deal depends whether you are the buyer, you are the seller, depends on factors like tax consideration, liability management, complexity of the entity, and what you actually try to accomplish in the end. So there's no best method. Both methods are used, depending on which country, which organization, and complexity. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you found this useful. See you in another video. Bye-bye.